Hey guys, so I wanted to film a quick intro for this video. I just wanted to let you know that this video is a bit of a train wreck. I realize that, but I've worked so hard on this video and I've spent so much time on it that I wanted to get it out in the world, even if it's not perfect. So I had to cut a lot of content out because it was so long, so if it's kind of jumpy and a little bit confusing, I'm sorry, but that's just the nature of the book we're talking about today. Speaking of that, let me get a few things out of the way. So today's video we're playing the Stephen King drinking game. This was invented by the Nostalgia Critic for his review of the 1990s TV miniseries of It. I was inspired to do a book version of this by watching Ali Corvier, who occasionally mixes drinking in with her book videos. She has an awesome channel. If you haven't watched it already, I'll leave a link in the description below. Also, a quick thank you to her because she made my amazing channel banner. Ali, if you're watching, you're breathtaking. The rules of the Stephen King drinking game are simple. You go through a Stephen King story, and every time there is a cliche of Stephen King's writing, you take a drink. I'm drinking Angry Orchard in this video, not doing shots like most people would do because I don't really like hard liquor, and also I didn't really feel like getting completely tanked that day. So I just stuck to Angry Orchard. Sorry about it. I don't hate Stephen King. He's written a lot of great stories. Unfortunately, he's also written quite a few bad ones, including the book we're going to be looking at today, which is The Regulators from 1996. This video is completely uncensored and features talk of sexual content, including some things that border on sexual violence. It doesn't really go into it, but I do talk about it, and there is a lot of cringe. Anyway, so that's kind of all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy this. I hope this video makes some semblance of sense, and I hope you get a laugh out of it. So let me know, and I hope you enjoy. So usually, the first drink in the Stephen King drinking game is take a drink if your Stephen King story takes place in Maine, but we will not be doing that today because this book takes place in Ohio. I have personal petty beef with Ohio. I don't really care to explain what it is, but just, I don't like Ohio. If you're from Ohio, nothing against you personally. I just think your state sucks. It's a little bit ironic that, like, my least favorite book I've ever read happens to take place in one of my least favorite places on the face of the planet. So, you know, beautiful. Love it. Also, before we even get started with the book, I have a problem with it. There's a map here. This takes place in a suburban neighborhood, okay? And it tells you all the houses, who lives in what. But on the corner here, that's a convenience store. In a suburban neighborhood? I don't know if this is more common in the north, but here in the south, they don't put convenience stores in neighborhoods, specifically not next to, like, a house. You wouldn't get anyone that would move to your suburban neighborhood if there was a 7-Eleven on the corner. People wouldn't do it. That kind of struck me as dumb, but again, if it's a northern thing, can y'all let me know? I mean, we're all about learning here, so maybe I'll learn something today. Certainly didn't learn anything from this book. So before we dive into the plot, I want to kind of examine all of our characters, all our players, because there are some real winners here. Sorry for staring off to the side. I have notes on my computer here. So our first characters to look at is Brad and Belinda Josephson, and they live on the top corner of Poplar Street and Bear Street, and they are a lovely African-American couple. They're two of the best characters in the book because they're two of the only characters that aren't horrible jackasses, but they're described as looking just the way people in suburban Ohio like their black people. That, of course, brings us to our first drink, which is a racist comment or racial slur, because that reminds me of something that would be in Get Out, and it makes me really uncomfortable, so, yeah. Next on the list is Johnny Marinville, who is sort of the main character. He's the one that's focused on a lot, along with the character we'll get to later. But he is a writer, which is another drink. Also, he sits on his porch and he sings folk song. And of course, the folk song he has to be singing is a reference to a real song, Leaving on a Jet Plane by John Denver. How dare you, Stephen? He tried to give you sunshine on your shoulders and you include him in this crap? I'm angry. Moving down the list, we have the Reeds. There are the Reed twins, who are 17 years old, and they're like basic-ass white boy syndrome. There's also their mom, which she's just a total pain in the ass, but we'll get to her. Next door, there are the Gellers, who Susie Geller is one of the Reed's girlfriends. I can never keep track who because they're indistinguishable from each other. Excuse me. And her mom, Cammy Geller, I have in the description that she's A true Karen. Sorry to anyone named Karen watching this video, but your name is just perfect for describing suburban white mom syndrome. And so I'm going to roll with it, but I'm sure you're a nice person. All right, next up there's the Carvers, which is 2 adults, and they have 2 little kids who are going to meet in the beginning of the plot. There's Ellie Carver, who's a really sweet and nice girl. And then there's Ralphie Carver, who should be put on a list because he is a future psychopath. Guaranteed. But we'll get there. Then there are the Soldersons. There's Gary, who is a drunkard. And then there's his wife, Michelle, who he describes as the bitch of the Western world, but she kept her body in shape. We're going to file that under a sexist comment, which is yet another drink. There's also another character in the book who says that she would describe Michelle with a word that rhymes with the one for how you kick a football. We're going to file that under yet another sexist remark. Then there's Audrey Weiler, who's like the other main character. She's taking care of her nephew Seth, but when she's introduced in the story, she's standing topless on her porch for reasons we'll get to later, and that's going to bring us to our first drink for needless, unnecessary, or weird sex thing. We're going to get good use out of this rule today, don't you worry. Her nephew Seth, though, this is where we really get going because her nephew, of course, has psychic powers. So take a drink if there's a character with a magical ability. Second drink if it's a psychic child. Ugh. Also take a drink if your character has a mental disability and he is autistic. We're going to get to the autism rep later.
So I ended up actually cutting the part where I talked about the autism rep, but basically I think it's bad. I've read characters in other books that seem to match the description of autism I've heard from people who have autism, and I don't think Stephen King did a good job writing an autistic character, so yeah.
Psychic child with autism, third drink for one character. Oh, this was such a bad fucking idea. Then there's Colleen Trajan, who lives on the corner, who is a police officer who was fired for failing the drug test, even though, according to him, he never did drugs. Then there's Steve Ames, who is a trucker that rolls in towards the start of the story, and he's got a catchphrase, "No problem, man." And we repeat that, which brings in a rule of the repetitive phrase. Ooh. So that's all I want to talk about the characters. So I'm going to give this first can, since it's almost gone, a little time to sink in and loosen me up a little bit. And then we're going to dive into the plot. And hopefully, by the time this video ends, what I'm saying will still be coherent, because I feel like I'm barely coherent and articulate when I'm sober. So we'll see what happens. But I will see you again in a few minutes. You know, in retrospect, I have no idea how I thought this was a good idea. So some time has passed, and I went ahead and knocked out the rest of my first can because I didn't have that much left. And can number 2. Oh, I love Angry Orchard, it's so good. So the plot of the Regulators. Here's the thing. This is like a mediocre or bad short story that's given enough detail to stretch it out to a 500-page novel. This was written as a mere alternate universe version of Desperation, or as like an alternate universe tie-in novel. I haven't read Desperation, obviously, so I don't really know how the two tie together. I've heard they have like the same character names, and you visit Desperation in this book, but we'll get to that. And I just don't really know why, of all his stories ideas, this one got turned into a novel. I usually praise Stephen King, even if he doesn't write a good book. Usually his ideas are really good. And just this one, I just think from the start, it just wasn't a good idea. But I don't want to spoil it, so we're going to dive in. I'm going to take you from cover to cover, and you can see for yourself if you thought there was a seed of a good idea in here, because I think just the foundation of this house is just broken. So the plot begins, we begin at the convenience store that I mentioned earlier, the one that's in a suburban neighborhood for some reason. And we see Ellie and Ralphie Carver arguing about the fact that Ellie says they have to split a candy bar because they don't have enough money for 2. And Ralphie Carver claims that she had enough money to buy 2, but she spent it on a magazine.
I know these details might seem trivial now, but don't worry, it gets paid off later.
And we're introduced to Cynthia, who I forgot to mention earlier in my character description. And she's like sympathetic to Ellie because, you know, Ellie's a decent human being and Ralphie's like the next Hitler. Anyway, so after the scene in the convenience store, we flash to Carrie Ripton, who is the newspaper boy, who's delivering the paper, and we get introduced to all the residents of Poplar Street. Note to writers, you know what's the worst way to introduce a bunch of characters? All at once, because we're introduced to so many people, we don't know who to latch onto or who we're supposed to care about, and we can't really tell them apart. So don't do this where you just kind of throw a dozen characters at us and then start throwing the plot. Anyway, as he's delivering the papers, the Reed twins are playing Frisbee and they have a dog, and the dog goes after them and they're trying to call him back, and Carrie Ripton notices that one of the Reed twins' girlfriends is really hot and he wants to impress them, so he calms the dog down with his sunflower seeds to show her his animal prowess. I mean, I guess it's not the worst seduction technique. You just gotta get a dog lover, I guess. After that, in the book, it says, the redhead is applauding him, bouncing up and down next to Susie Geller. Her boobs, small but delectable, kind of jiggling inside the halter she's wearing. Oh, thank you, Lord. Oh, thank you so much. We have enough jack-off material in our memory banks to last at least a week. You know, King, 14-year-old boys have a rough enough time with their own reputation without you making it worse. Also, interjection of a random sexual comment, which is a drink. Also, this book just makes me want to drink, so, you know, I'm happy for any excuse. As he's delivering the paper, a giant bright red van with a chrome radar dish drives by, and of course everyone's like, what? But as it's driving by, Carrie's distracted because he's supposed to deliver a newspaper to Colleen Trajan, who is a cop that was fired, and he's actually been fired for failing a drug test, even though he claims he never took drugs. But there's a bunch of rumors surrounding why he did it, and including one that he killed a bunch of kids. So everyone's afraid of him. So Stephen King feels the need to tell us ahead of time that Carrie is never going to play another baseball game or lose his virginity, because, you know, that's the important things in life, because he's about to die. Note to writers, don't spoil your character deaths. It takes all the tension and suspense out of a situation when you know the outcome. But the actual death happens when the red van, the bright red van, with the chrome radar dish, pulls up, rolls down its window, sticks out a shotgun, and shoots him. So after that happens, we get this newspaper article in which we're told that Seth Garron, who is the nephew of Audrey Weiler, who we are introduced to during the character dump, his family was killed in a similar incident in Nevada while they were on a road trip, and that a bright red van there also showed up and killed everyone but Seth. So we don't really know what's happening, but we're introduced to this bright red van that's come before and has a bright chrome radar dish. But then the van pulls up to Ellie and Ralphie Carver. At the same time, Steve Ames, that I mentioned earlier, pulls up with his truck. His truck's breaking down, and he sees that happening. So he goes to grab the two kids. Cynthia, who works in the convenience store, she goes to grab the two kids. At the same time, the Reed twins' dog runs by them, and the shooter, instead of shooting the kids, shoots the dog, which brings us to our next drink, which is animal abuse or murder. I'm going to be real. Of all my gripes I have with Stephen King's writing, animal abuse is probably my biggest one. I can get mad about dumb sex thoughts or racist characters, but, like, don't put animal abuse or death in my books. Like, it just hurts me, you know? So then we kind of see the aftermath of the event. We see all the characters sort of react and try to piece together what happened, and they're all kind of freaking out. You could just told us in a sentence that everyone came out, looked, and was freaking out, but no, we have to see like every character's individual reaction because, you know, it's a novel and we need to get it to novel length. So Gary Soderson, the drunk I mentioned earlier, he has a reaction to the drive-by shooting, and his wife asks him, "Are you deaf, Gary, or just stupid?" And there's a comment here. If he ever sobered up for good, he would have to divorce her, or at least slit her vocal cords first. We're definitely going to file that under sexual violence, sexism, something. I don't know. I need a drink when I read this book. After this happens, Johnny Marinville tries to call the police, and when he picks up the phone, there's this like someone on the line where there's this like heavy, wet breathing, and he gives us this beautiful moment, this beautiful phrase. Little bitty baby Smitty. I seen you bite your mommy's titty. Don't you fret and don't you pout. Don't you spit that titty out. And of course, he has the reaction, which is, the fuck? And he tells whoever's on there to get off the line. And then he calls back again, and the same voice answers and says, little bitty baby Smitty stuck his prick in mommy's slitty. Don't you fret, don't you pout, she won't make you take it out. And then he says, don't you call here no more, you old fool. Talk. So, first of all, drink for a repeated phrase of little bitty baby Smitty, which may be one of the more dumb and hilarious repeated phrases in history of Stephen King. But also, at the end, you're kind of wondering, what's with the talk? Well, it turns out Talk is the villain of this book, and we're going to get to him later. But I'd just like to mention, he likes to end a lot of his, calls and things with his name, like he's some sort of rapper. No one cares. You're the worst MC ever. So then, while all this is happening, a blue van shows up, and then a yellow van also shows up. And again, they're bright neon colors. They have strange things fixed to them. And everyone's like, what? But at this point, they're just kind of sitting at the ends of the street and not doing anything. While this is happening, Mary Jackson, who's the husband of Peter Jackson, both of which I completely forgot to mention in my character descriptions because they are so forgettable. It's mentioned that she's coming home from an affair, which is handy because she doesn't have any panties on, because it's mentioned that her lover ripped off and tore her panties. Random unneeded sex. So Mary Jackson pulls into the driveway, and she's trying to figure out what's happening. Everyone's kind of out of their house, and they're covering Carrie Ripton's dead body with a tarp to try to preserve it for the police, for evidence. So while all this is happening, the yellow van pulls up and rear-ends her car, meaning she got rear-ended for the second time that day.
And with this one bad joke, Zach was officially deemed problematic and banished from the BookTube realms forever. Congratulations, you suck.
So after she gets rear-ended, she gets out of the car, she's a little dazed, and she gets shot in the face with a shotgun. And it mentions blowing off half her face, but then she walks around with half a face. If a shotgun's close enough to blast half your face off, it's gonna knock you over. You're not gonna be able to walk. I know this is a horror book and it's just supposed to be a creepy moment, but that's not how guns work. Have you guessed I'm from the southern United States? Because I am. So after that happens, the
vans
attack everyone else. The dad of the Carver children is killed, and then Mary L. Solderson is hurt, and her arm is hanging by a thread because she got hit in the shoulder. We then take a break from all this to read a review of something called the Motocop Toys, which is based on this fictional TV show that's G.I. Joe, Star Wars kind of meet. And they mention these toys called the Power Wagons, which are the vehicles that they drive, and they come in bright neon colors, and they have chrome radar dishes. Does this sound familiar? Are you figuring out what's happening? You might be thinking, it can't be so dumb that the whole plot is that children's cartoon characters and toys have come to life and are attacking people, could it? Well, guess what? It is. So the characters in question end up scrambling into two different houses. I forget who ends up in what house because it doesn't really matter, really. And they all try to scramble to try to recover, try to save people from dying, try to help those that are injured. And then we flash over to Audrey in her house. We get to see Seth, who's I believe he's 8. It keeps throwing different ages at us, but I believe he's 8. He's definitely prepubescent, which is critical for something later. Seth seems to be inhabited by a spirit demonic thing called Tack, which is the thing that called Johnny Marinville on the phone earlier. And it's mentioned that he's an energy vampire, stealing energy and thriving off of people's pain. It's also mentioned that Audrey Weiler is able to escape kind of the pain and torment inflicted on her by revisiting the memory of a picnic she had while on vacation with her friend from years ago. There's also this thing where there's a bright red toy phone that's called the Talk phone that will ring. They don't really know what's going to happen when it does ring at this point, but we'll get to that. It then mentions that Talk has the ability to control her and manipulate her mind, and that he's made her dye her hair and dress like one of the characters from Motocops, the show where the toys came from that the attacking bands come from. And there's this just awful, horrible, yet beautiful quote about how Audrey feels about the whole situation. It's as if it sometimes saw her as its own private gatefold version of the tough but unremittingly wholesome Cassie Stiles. Hey kids, check out the tits on your favorite moto cop. Oh boy. Sometimes I swear this was a surviving manuscript from when King was 13. She then tries to escape, but she's stopped, and then we flash back over to the survivors on the other side of the street. So after all this happens, Johnny Marinville goes to try to recover Mary Jackson's body, and he's sitting there trying to see if the vans are still there, and Brad sneaks up behind him and scares him, and when he asks Brad what he's doing, he responds, "White Folks Fun Patrol." I know white people and black people have to be in a competition to be stupider in a horror story, but like White Folks Fun Patrol, still calling that racist, which is another drink. So in the other house, I believe, Marielle Souderson, they're trying to save her arm and they end up accidentally ripping it off. And one of the residents in the neighborhood has this random thought in his head where he says it reminds him of meat and says, "Serve it medium rare with a little mint jelly on the side. Mrs. Ames and your family will never ask for roast chicken again, I guarantee it." What? Also, it's mentioned after they pull off her arm that she went the fabled Wider Shade of Pale, which is, of course, a classic song. Another classic song ruined by this fucking book. Then they look in the china hutch and they find a shotgun shell, but they note that it's not like any real shotgun shell and that it wouldn't really even fire in real life because it doesn't have all the proper parts. And they say it's like the child's idea of a bullet. So yeah, we're going to expand on that in a minute. Then we're given an excerpt of the Motocop show. And there's a very important detail to note here is that the screenplay is by one Alan Smithy. Alan Smithy, if you don't know, is the name that the Directors Guild designates if you don't want to take credit for a movie you directed, you can put this pseudonym on. So he couldn't even come up with a fictional character that wanted to take credit for this shit. I'm sure it's supposed to be just like a clever, nice Easter egg, but I'm just not having it at this point. We then flash back to Audrey Weiler, and Tok kind of throws her around, makes her hit herself, and makes her drink honey, which is kind of the most hilariously awful torture you could really come up with. And it's like sad because she's getting tortured, but also funny because like he's making her drink honey. This is really the worst you could do. Anyway, all of a sudden Tok disappears and Seth comes back out because they kind of switch off who's in control of the body of Seth's body. And Seth tells her to go across the street and join the other survivors that Tok is building. He's building something. So the moto cops come back and they start shooting. And Pie Carver, who is now a single mother with her 2 children, is holding her daughter. And she drops her daughter and goes, "Give me my son, give me my son." Really? I want a sequel to this book in which we see Ellie Carver, who is now a teenager, who can now blow off anything her mom does by just being like, "Hey mom, remember when we were being attacked by psychic cartoon characters come to life and you totally dropped me so you could hold Ralphie? Yeah, you can't tell me shit, mom." Just like, you can't come back from that as a mom. Like, your reputation with your daughter is just destroyed forever. Just, it's hilarious. Then, while the attack's happening, Johnny Marinville looks at the vans attacking, and he notices there's like an alien, and there's a guy with no face, and there's a guy in a Confederate uniform, and he's walking around the Carver house, and in Ralphie's room, he notices that there's a action figure of one of the guys in the attacks. And he asks Ralphie about it, and he says, yeah, it's one of the moto cops. He then also has like this weird flashback where he remembers moving to Ohio, and his like agent is like, you sure you want to do this? I mean, I'm with the literary agent. If a friend of mine tried to move to Ohio, I would have some questions too. But then they look out and they notice a giant buzzard is attacking Mary Jackson's body. And then it's not a real buzzard. It looks like a child's drawing of a buzzard. It has like unequal claws on each foot. I'm not a zoologist. Hopefully I got that right. And it looks like it's been confused with a bald eagle. So that's a thing. Then there's a discussion on what to do next. And they say there is a path behind the house that leads to other parts of the neighborhood, other streets. And they think they should go there because the phones are dead. And if they go out, maybe they can find someone else's phone and call for help, because no cops have showed up, and there's a fire by this point, I believe, that no fire department has shown up to put out. Switching back to Audrey Weiler, who's still in her like fantasy safe realm, the red play phone from earlier rings, and Seth tells her to come back and that he has a plan with how to defeat Tok. Here's the thing, I want to quickly talk about Tok. So Tok is a supernatural entity, which is another rule. But he's not really given a backstory, and like, is he extraterrestrial? Like, he's just kind of this evil spirit. We're not really told much about him. He's really underexplained. And in a horror story, especially like one with a monster or like a supernatural force, you need rules. Salem's Lot's a really good example of this, where you have kind of the vampire rules from like Dracula. And same thing in like The Shining, where you realize that the spirits of the hotel can't really do anything. They need to infect the mind of a person to do their bidding for them. So you're kind of given these rules, and it's kind of this chess game of like supernatural force with realistic handicaps trying to get to their end goal. This book doesn't really do that, and it's really frustrating and really annoying, and it's going to get really dumb when you find out how they managed to defeat him. So right before they go on the path, they look out the window and they manage to talk between the two houses, and they say, you know, one house is sending out Johnny Marinville and the Reed twins, and I believe the other house sends out Cynthia and Collie and Trajan. Don't quote me on that. But they look out the window and they notice there's a piece of tumbleweed. One important detail I forgot to mention earlier is that on top of being obsessed with the Motocop show, Seth was obsessed with spaghetti westerns and oat operas, and we even get a review of this old western movie called The Regulators, and we keep getting like quotes from it, and we even see part of the screenplay at some point during the story, and it's mentioned that one of the attackers in the power wagons in the vans has a Confederate uniform on, just like one of the characters from the movie. So yes, all in all, this plot is that a child's favorite TV shows and movies come to life, along with his childhood drawings, and attack the residents of a suburban Ohio neighborhood. That is just like the worst idea I've ever heard, but you know, it exists, so whatever. So while they're on the path turns into a desert, and there's also coyotes and mountain lions, which are also in the style of a kid's drawing. They're not like real, they're unrealistic. And also they shoot one in the head, and it's got like pink insulation, which is, to me, another thing, you know, a kid would assume that the brain is actually like cottony, kind of like insulation, instead of soft and squishy like I think it actually is. I'm not a biology major, so I don't know. So while they're on the path, Jim Reed accidentally shoots Colleen Trajan, the cop from earlier. Then he turns a gun on himself and kills himself. So when Jim Reed commits suicide, it talks about, you know, he puts the gun to his head, and they're like, he hesitates and they think maybe he won't do it, and then he fires. And there's this quote, "Then his head blew apart. His ambitions to write great essays, not to mention those of getting into Susie Geller's pants, so much vapor into the sunset air." Another random sexual thought. Again, man, just give it a rest. Like, I know like real people think about sex, but like I would hope in a disaster, a weird situation like this, like sex would not be as on the mind as it is of most of these people. Then for some reason, Dave Reed, brother of the boy who committed suicide, blames Johnny Marinville for killing his brother by convincing them to go out on the path, even though the Reed twins are going to go out by themselves. And Johnny Marinville was like, hey, let an adult tag along. And Cammy Reed comes out on the path and is like, yep, sounds good to me, and goes to shoot him. But then a man from earlier, a hobo, I believe, is like reconstructed as a zombie and ends up coming between them. So she ends up not shooting him. Then they run back to the house because they're all just like, okay, well, obviously we're not going to find anything out here because everything is desert. And then as they're running back, you know, coyotes are howling because, you know, it's the kid's idea of like a Wild West and there would be like coyotes there. Then there's a scream in the forest, and it says that this sound, more than that of strangers in the woods, made Johnny's balls pull up against his groin. King, I don't need to know about the activity of your character's groins. I can't believe I need to say this, but like, you can just say he's freaked out or he's scared. You don't need to describe what happens to his ball sack. So Tak ends up absorbing the spiritual power of the cop and of Jim Reed, and he ends up mounting one last attack. But before that happens, we find out what Tak's Achilles heel is, as it were. Allow me to read this beautiful quote. It hated Seth's eliminatory functions even when they were normal, and on that night they had been anything but. Tak, an evil spirit that it said has existed for millennia, can't handle when its host takes a shit. Why am I reading this? So then we're given this letter from a guy who worked at a mine in Nevada, where they mentioned that Seth's family came to visit them, and he was obsessed with the mine because it was supposedly the mine from Ponderosa. And while they're kind of visiting and looking at mine equipment, Seth runs into this recently uncovered mine. Keep in mind, this mine is inhabited by the dead bodies of a bunch of old Chinese miners, because apparently they were mining there at the time. And he runs to the end, and there's this like crack in the wall, and they mention there's these like two almost embers in the air that go to the boy. The guy who's giving the tour, the guy who's writing the letter, and then his dad, who also ran in the mine after him, catch up to him, and they're like, why did you do that? And he says, oh, they ask him why he did it, and he goes, Colonel Henry and Major Pike told me to. They told me I could see the Ponderosa in there. So apparently, Tak, I guess, was stuck in the mine, and he managed to call out to Seth so that he could invade his body. So that's a thing. I also want to mention here real quick, this is supposedly typed by like a typewriter, and while it's kind of neat, all the letters are faded to make it look like a realistic old typewriter, and it makes it harder to read. We appreciate cool things in books, but when it makes it harder to read, we don't like that. So don't do it. You're not House of Leaves. Also, there's this thing here where it talks about like this document is presented here exactly as it was found by the editor. This book takes place in present tense third-person narration, and then these documents are included by an editor? Who's editing this story? What is this? Like, there's no framing device except for when this happens. Just include these things. I don't need your editorial. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So when Seth gets possessed by Tak, the guy giving the tour of the mine mentions that the boy was grinning, and it wasn't a nice grin either. The corners of his mouth looked like they were pulled apart most of the way up to his ears, and I could see all his teeth. And he says, like, this, like, haunts his nightmares. And it's like, so you're haunted by a kid grinning? Also, the way this grin is described makes you think of the trailer for that movie, Truth or Dare, that came out a few months back, which makes it funny. And something that's supposed to be scary, but it's actually funny, is a drinking rule. So we flip back to the characters who are in the desert, and they're running back to the house. Belinda gets over the fence, and Susie Geller screams that Jim's dead, because I think she was his girlfriend. And Belinda just smacks the girl to shut her up. And the girl says, and the girl's mother says, you can't hit my daughter. You can't hit my daughter, you bitch. I don't care what ideas you gotten from affirmative action, you fat black bitch. More racism. Then we go back to the characters who are outside the fence, and it gets down to the last few people. And Brad Josephson lets Johnny Marinville step on his back to help get over the fence, and he says, Jesus, I feel like the president of South Africa. I don't know what that means. If that makes sense to anyone, can you let me know? Because I feel like I'm missing some historical context. So Johnny Marinville gets over, and then he's helping Brad try to get over before he's attacked by more like childhood drawing monsters. And Johnny Marinville starts laughing, and Brad asks him what's funny. He says, I had an idea for a movie. Black men can't climb fences. If you didn't know, I believe this is a reference to the movie White Men Can't Jump, starring Woody Harrelson. But it's racist as shit, so I'm just going to take another drink. So finally, they get over the fence, right? And then out from the desert comes like a dinosaur that like ends up killing someone. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. They end up killing it like immediately, so like I guess he just wanted to adopt a character with a dinosaur because Jurassic Park was a thing. So when they get in the house, Susie Geller is like crying. She's freaking out. And Johnny tells her to shut up. And Kim Geller, this is where her true Karen nature comes in. My daughter may never get over serious trauma like this. She's had a profound shock. Ma'am, your neighborhood's being attacked by supernatural cartoon characters come to life. I think everyone's shocked, including me. I'm dealing with psychological trauma from reading this. So, yeah. And then she starts trying to make everyone else mad. She drops the N-word because, it's not a Stephen King book unless someone drops the N-bomb. He's way too comfortable using the N-word, and I wish he wouldn't. So then Audrey Weiler shows up, and she tells everyone else what happened. They end up all in the same house. And if you weren't able to figure out the plot for yourself, or you weren't able to piece that together when Johnny Marinville was piecing it together, here Audrey Weiler spoon feeds the plot to you and confirm that Tok is making Seth's obsessions and childhood drawings and everything come to life and attack them for some reason.
At this point in the story, Ralphie Carver throws a tantrum in which he claims that if Ellie Carver had bought him the candy bar at the start of the book, none of this would have happened. Congratulations, Ralphie. You're a little kid, but you're already a douche.
She then conveys that her husband, who ended up committing suicide after dealing with Tok for so long, she mentions that Tok wanted to possess her husband's body so that they could have sex because Tok wants to experience sex. We're going to file that under rape, and I'm just so uncomfortable that I need. Oh, that's just fucked up. So anyway, Audrey explains, what's going on, what her plan is, and they're like, hey, maybe we should kill Seth so that we can kill the thing inside of him. And she's like, no, you're not going to kill him, even though, it makes sense just to kill him. Then the Regulators make one last appearance, and while this is happening, we get just the coup de grace of dumb sex moments. So there's a humming sound right before the Regulators come, and then they all start shooting again. And then they just sort of stop for some reason. So Kim Geller's there, and she stands up and she's shouting, make it stop. And then there's this beautiful moment. Get down, Mom, Susie calls, but she herself does not stir from beside David Reed, who is lying with one arm around her and his hand, the one that his creepy mother can't see from where she is, against her breast. Susie doesn't mind his hand a bit. Would mind, in fact, if he took it away. Her terror and her almost maternal concern for the surviving twin have combined to make her horny for the first time in her life. So I've thought about this line more than I care to admit. And the whole maternal care making you horny makes sense in one context. If, a young woman is playing with a baby or a little kid, and she's like, wow, babies are great. I want one. Hey, I know how I can make one. Hey, babe, come here. Then I could see your maternal instincts making you horny. But in this context, that doesn't work. So I can only conclude that Susie Geller, a perspective we haven't read from before, has a freaky sex thought, another drink, and that it's kinky because she's into some motherly fantasies, let's say. So the trifecta, let's go. But we're not done yet. Oh no. So Kim Geller gets up to yell at the Regulators to stop firing supernaturally powerful guns at the house. And this happens. At the sound of that voice, Susie forgets about how nice it is to have David Reed touching her breast and how she'd like to help him forget the death of his brother by taking him upstairs and bawling him until his liver explodes. Alright, let's break this down. 1. Ball him till his liver explodes? What? Look, I mean, be like a fine olive oil. But if I was hooking up with a girl and I felt like my liver was being damaged, I'd have to be like, excuse me, ma'am, I'm already down one vital organ due to diabetes. If you could leave the rest intact, I would appreciate that. Also, he's a teenage boy. You think he's going to last until, that happens? Sure, honey. So anyway, I'm losing my patience for this, so I'm just really going to fly through this last little bit. Basically, the plot that Audrey did, because Tok hates the fact that Seth poops, is she put a bunch of laxatives into his chocolate milk so that he would have to shit. This was written by a grown-ass man. And while he's there, Seth manages to kind of lock him out of his mind, and Audrey and Johnny go over across the street and grab him, and so does Cammy Reed, who follows them to try to exact revenge for her son killing himself by killing Seth. While Talk is locked out of Seth's mind, Cammy Reed ends up shooting both Audrey and Seth, and then Talk tries to invade the mind of Cammy Reed, and her head swells up and explodes for some reason. And there is this beautiful quote. Where is it? Talk, it proclaims in a guttural voice, which is nothing like Cammy's. Takawan, Takala, me him into. I know you all. I'll find you all. I'll hunt you down. Tak, me him into. What does that mean? Fuck if I know. So I guess when Cammy Reed's head explodes, he ceases to exist for some reason, even though he shouldn't. I don't know. I just want this book to be over. So then, after Talk seems to go, the desert fades, the power wagons fade, the police finally show up, the fire department shows up, and they're trying to figure out what's happening. And Steve Ames makes a joke, and then Johnny Marinville goes and he says, I'm going to go sing a song about the good guys and the bad guys, and walks toward his house. The end. Final drink for a what the fuck ending. And then there is an epilogue in which a lady who's visiting Mohonk, the resort hotel that Audrey Weiler visited back in the day where her fantasy zone was, and notes that it reminds her of the book The Shining, so reference to one of Stephen King's own books, and that there's this sort of rumor going around that a woman and her son are haunting the hotel grounds. So in escaping from Talk's reign, they've gone to ruin a hotel's reputation and business forever because of a memory she had. And that's The Regulators. Again, this is just one of the dumbest things I've ever read. I'd give it a 0 star if I could, but because I can't, I guess I'll give it a 1. I don't think it deserves the 1 star even, but what can you do? If you like this video, which I don't know how, because this video is going to be just a total mess, feel free to give it a like. Please feel free to share it. I spent a lot of mental energy and also money to get the booze. I mean, I know I got to drink it, but it wasn't fun in this context. So please share it with your friends if you think they'd get a kick out of this. Otherwise, feel free to subscribe for content that actually doesn't suck. And I'll see you next time. Don't know if I ever do this again, but if you want me to, let me know. And bye.